So I was kind of the yes girl, and obviously it was completely unsustainable, but I didn't even realize it myself. Like is often the case in life, it takes a bit of an external trigger or a life quake for us to realize that something is wrong. And in my case, it was a health scare. So one morning, I realized that my entire arm had turned purple.
You are listening to My Rejection Story, hosted by Alice Draper. Welcome back to another episode of My Rejection Story. I am joined by Anne-Laure Le Cunff, the neuroscientist and author of Tiny Experiments, and I'm so excited for today's conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Anne.
Thank you so much for having me.
I know that you had a bit of your own journey, Anne, where you were working at Google and then you did something very scary and your mom was terrified and you had to show yourself that you could survive. So could you talk a little bit about, your own story?
Absolutely. So I started my career at Google and I felt really, really lucky at the time. It was an amazing job, amazing team, amazing projects. And because I felt so lucky, I also thought that someone would discover that they had made a hiring mistake and that I didn't belong in this company surrounded with all of these smart people working on these amazing projects. And so as a result, I was saying yes to absolutely everything. You could tell me at 6 p.m. you needed help with something that needed to be done by 8 a.m. the day after. And I would say, yes, absolutely. I'm your girl. You can count on me. So I was kind of the yes girl. And obviously it was completely unsustainable, but I didn't even realize it myself. Like is often the case in life, it takes a bit of an external trigger or a life quake for us to realize that something is wrong. And in my case, it was a health scare. So one morning I realized that my entire arm had turned purple. So I went to the Google infirmary because we had that on campus. And the nurse had one look at it, sent me to the hospital, and the doctors at the hospital said, we need to perform surgery as quickly as possible. You have a blood clot in your arm that is threatening to travel to your lungs. And in that moment, my response was, 1 second, I need to check my calendar. And I was so obsessed with doing my work properly, having my team think that they could rely on me, that was the first place where my mind went. When the doctors were telling me that it was a life or death situation, I thought about my tasks at work. So this is when I started questioning my entire priorities in work and life. And I ended up a few months later quitting my job at Google. You mentioned my mom. She was not happy about that decision. I grew up in an immigrant family where school and education had always been seen as the way to secure a safe spot in society where you would be okay. And my mom felt like she did a great job, had a good job, and we were done. She could now rest and relax. And all of a sudden, I tell her, I'm quitting this job. So that was, a little bit of a leap of faith, of kind of trusting that I could leave this job and figure out something better for myself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing this. I'm just going to share something quickly because it's really stuck with me. Is you were quite young when you went through this, and a lot of people I talk to go through this later in life where it's not necessarily a health scare. It can be a health scare, or it's a death or in their family or something kind of that shatters the way that they've prioritized their life so far. And I had a guest on here, a psychologist, who framed these as psychosocial crises that often happen in midlife, but sometimes they happen a little bit early year in our lives, and it kind of shifts our priorities from acceptance or inclusion. It sounds like, you're asking everyone to say yes. You're saying yes to every request, to like legacy, which is more like kind of what life do I want to live and what life do I want to leave behind. I know in your book, when you write about tiny experiments, you talk a lot about kind of leaning into curiosity and allowing for uncertainty. Uncertainty is kind of a theme there. And uncertainty is something that I struggled with, and I think many of the listeners struggled with, and many of us want to control. And it's why many people stay in the job that doesn't really let them thrive or fulfill them, but it's more certain than going out into the unknown and figuring your own path. Could you talk to us a little bit, yeah, kind of maybe uncertainty from the lens of your experience and maybe even how the brain deals with uncertainty?
Yeah, it is kind of connected to what we discussed earlier about that, you know, that need for ensuring our survival. Uncertainty is not a good thing if you're just trying to survive. And again, in the past, the more information you had or the more information you thought you had, the more safe you felt. And that could be, who are your friends and enemies in the tribe? Where are the resources? What's that weird noise over there? Knowing what was going on around you, being able to predict what would happen, this gave you a sense of safety. And our brains haven't changed that much over the past few thousands of years. So today, in our current environment, we're still seeking that sense of certainty. We want to feel like we know what's going to happen. And this is why a lot of us, when we find ourselves in situations of uncertainty, we cling to control, or rather to the illusion of control. We try to make plans. We do a lot of research. We love it when people tell us, here's a blueprint. Here are 3 steps to success. Just apply this, do it, and it will all work out. You will be fine. We love being told that things are going to be okay. And the problem is that in that process of seeking certainty, of clinging to that illusion of control, we close many doors to potential opportunities, exploration, and connections, and really opportunities for growth and self-discovery.
Yeah, yeah. I again enjoy that you framed it as survival because I never really thought of it that way as well. But yeah, it's easier to know kind of that we can survive if we know what's going to happen tomorrow and next week and next month, and harder. And when you made that decision to leave Google following your health scare and against your mother's advice, did how are you able to manage just cognitively yourself that uncertainty when you know you can survive and pay all the paychecks and make sure you're like everyone's happy if you stay in this job, and now you're going into this unknown space? How did you navigate that uncertainty?
I wish I could tell you that I managed it very well, but I didn't. I actually felt so uncomfortable with the uncertainty, with not knowing what I was, my mission, my work, what I was contributing. I I started my career working at the kind of company where it's so easy to introduce yourself. When people ask you, what do? You say, I work at Google. And people immediately assume that you might be doing something cool. They don't know what, but they'll assume that you're doing something cool. And all of a sudden, I didn't have that anymore. I didn't have that identity. And I realized that I didn't even know who I was and what I wanted. Instead of exploring that uncertainty and trying to figure out what I actually wanted, what I actually was curious about, I went straight back to the exact same patterns that I had at Google. And so I kind of jumped into the most socially sanctified kind of work that you can do when you're in Silicon Valley, which is I started a startup for all of the wrong reasons. To be able to say, this is the mission, this is what I'm working on, this is my purpose, this is my contribution. And it's only when the startup failed, which I think is one of the best things that happened in my life, that I finally admitted to myself that I was lost. And it was a very liberating thought.
Yeah, yeah. Why? I mean, I feel like not a lot of people would admit that something failing is liberating. Or maybe, I guess, actually, I'd reframe that. Not a lot of people would think that a startup failing is liberating. Why was it liberating, do you think?
All of a sudden, I felt like I didn't have a clear plan. I didn't have a ladder to climb. And it was scary. I think it's not incompatible for something to feel liberating and scary at the same time. And this is how I felt. I was a bit scared because I had had a very linear career up to this point. Study in school, have good grades, get a good job, quit your job at Google, and then start a startup. This is a very common path when you're in the tech industry. And all of a sudden, I didn't know what was the next rung on the ladder, what was the next thing I was supposed to climb, what was the next challenge. I didn't have that identity. And it gave me an immense sense of freedom because all of a sudden I had all of these possibilities in front of me. And this time around, I decided to explore them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Would you say, because you write about the hero's journey in your book, would you say that your startup failing was your hero's journey, or was it what came afterwards?
The startup failing was probably, if you look at the hero's journey, yes, that was probably the bottom point where then you start coming back up after that,
Yeah.
where the hero comes back being changed. Yes.
Can you describe what the hero's journey is for any listeners who don't know?
Picture a circle where you start at the top and you go clockwise. The hero starts their journey at the top and they go on an adventure. At first, they're very hopeful, but then usually something unexpected, sometimes terrible happens. You get to the bottom of the circle, 6 o'clock. There, they're in the valley of despair. And for a while, they think that they will never make it back up, that this is the end. But they find a way to figure it out. And so they start coming back up. You're on the other side of the circle. What's really interesting is that in that hero's journey, although visually speaking, the hero comes back to the same point where you started at the top, it's not the same person. And so very often in novels and movies that use the hero's journey as a pattern and a mental model for the narrative behind the work, the hero doesn't always come back exactly to where they were. They don't come back to the village, or they don't come back as the exact same person. They're too different now. And in some works, sometimes after a few years, the hero decides to go on another adventure and keeps going through these cycles. And this is how they grow and evolve.
Do you think as humans we go through multiple heroes' journeys as well? Like not
Absolutely.
necessarily not as a protagonist of a novel or a movie.
Yes. No, but I think we do. I think we go through these cycles of growth and they all have those very similar patterns of going through phases of challenge when we don't know if we're going to make it back up, right? We sometimes feel stuck. It feels almost impossible to get out of a very complex situation we find ourselves in that we feel we haven't been trained for. And this is another characteristic of the hero's journey. The hero, when they start their journey, is always very naive, ill-equipped to face the dangers that they're going to face. And it's only through going through that adventure that they acquire the tools and the skills and the friendships that allow them to survive and, as you mentioned earlier, to thrive and to transform their lives.
Yeah, I love that. And from that 6 o'clock point you describe, which is when in your own story you shared, or at least in one of your hero's journey stories, when your startup failed, and then there's coming back up around. Would you say that tiny experiments are a tool we can use to make us like get ourselves back up?
Absolutely. The first step of completing the hero's journey is believing that you are capable of figuring it out, even though if you don't know exactly what you're supposed to do. So it's really reconnecting with your sense of agency. And this is what having an experimental mindset is for. This is what tiny experiments are for. They're not telling you, here's the perfect plan. Here's a step-by-step blueprint that you can copy paste. They're telling you, here is a way for you to put your curiosity to work. Here's a way for you to start from a hypothesis, to try something, not with the conviction, the certainty that this is going to work, but just with the curiosity to see whether this is going to work. And when you conduct tiny experiments, you try different things without any kind of self-blame or self-judgment. If you don't get the outcome that you expected, you will inevitably complete that hero's journey in a way that maybe was hard to imagine or picture before you got started.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I love that. And I love that I mentioned before, of course, I love the whole concept of your tiny experiments. And one thing out of the many things that kind of sticks out to me is you're not measuring like the outputs. So you're not saying like I need to reach partner level in my job by X date, or if it's fitness related, I need to like reach this speed in this marathon by X date or whatever. It's more like these are actions that I'm going to take consistently and I'm going to do them for a set period of time. And then I'm going to assess my overwhelm and and also not do it running too many experiments at the same time, which I'm guilty of, like in the sense that when something's not working, I'm like, let me change like a million things in my life. And my partner's like, you know, you will never know what worked if you do that. So yeah, I love that you touched on that. But leaning into overwhelm, you write a lot in your book about how we have limited executive function in our brains, unfortunately. I wish we didn't. And that, yeah, if we commit 100%, if we try to commit 100% to everything, it's a recipe for burnout. Talk to me a little bit about overwhelm and how we can, I guess, know that we're putting our best foot forward in something we really care about, but we're not, you know, skating that path towards burnout because we're going too hard, pushing too hard on the accelerator.
In my work, I talk about intentional imperfection. And it's really the idea of embracing the fact that you cannot be at 100% of your performance across every single area of your life at any given time. So if you're giving 100% of your attention to work, you're probably not going to be able to be a fully present, helpful partner at home. If you are, for whatever reason, there's, you know, a lot of demands at home, someone's sick or finances or whatever that is that you need to pay a lot of attention to, it is completely normal that you're not going to be able to be 100% at work. The problem is that we usually completely ignore that. What I just said sounds obvious, right? It's one of those things. It sounds so obvious, but we completely ignore that. And we push ourselves to try to maintain our performance levels, the way we show up at 100% across absolutely everything. And then, unsurprisingly, we burn out. What I recommend doing is first, just accepting the fact that you cannot be 100% everywhere at any given time. But second, communicating it to others. And this is where it changes everything. You can absolutely tell your partner, hey, I have this thing coming up at work. I need to be super focused on this. I know I'm not going to be the best, most present, most helpful partner for the next week. And I'm asking you two things. The first one is to be patient with me. The second one is if there's something really important that slips through the cracks, something I promised I would do, something that is important that I'm not doing, just tell me. Don't get angry at me without telling me. Just tell me, because I know I'm not going to be fully present and I might miss it. And I don't want to have a stupid conflict for no reason whatsoever. I just want you to tell me. And when you do that, all of a sudden, that first allows yourself to fully focus on the important thing that's happening at work and to feel supported by your partner, but also for your partner to feel good about the situation. They know they're helping you. They know it's for this 1 week while you do your work. And they also know that in the future, when they are the ones in that situation, they can also communicate that they're only going to be able to be at 50% at home, for example. So that's really the key here. First, knowing that imperfection is the norm across the board. You're not going to be able to be fully perfect across the board. But second, and this is really the key, communicating it to the people around you.
Yeah, thanks for touching on that. I think as you're talking, I'm thinking like, you know, the communication piece, it demonstrates a level of self-awareness, which is assuring to your partner or whomever you're communicating to that you know that you're not going to be where you are normally for this week or this month or whatever. And I know when I'm on the receiving end of that, I'm kind of like, oh, that's reassuring to know that you know yourself that well. Do you think that some people struggle with maybe the self-awareness of knowing when to communicate these things?
I think, unfortunately, we've been told that we're supposed to be able to do it all. So it's not necessarily even a lack of self-awareness. I mean, the result might be a bit of self-awareness, but it's just that we don't even ask ourselves those questions. We just figure that we are supposed to be perfect in all of these roles. And anything less than that is failure. So I think, yes, lack of self-awareness, but probably more of a lack of self-compassion, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I love that lack of self-compassion. It's also making me think, you wrote in the book that the productivity, I think it was 99, productivity of manual laborers had increased 50-fold over the last century. Peter Drucker wrote, I think you shared that in your book. And so there's this hyperfixation of productivity over curiosity. And would you say that tiny experiments are rewiring our brain to pursue curiosity over productivity?
Yes, and it can actually be very productive to be curious. So it's not even one or the other. They can work really well together. What I encourage people to do is to replace toxic productivity, the one that is really based on working as hard as possible and hustling very often at the expense of your physical and mental health, with mindful productivity. You still care about your work. You still want to have an impact. You still want to help others. But you know that in order to do that, you need to be mindful. You need to be present. You need to take care of your health. That's the only sustainable way to work. But then once you're convinced of that, how do you do it? What is sustainable for you? What is good for you? What works for your particular situation, for your health, for the current environment and your current ambitions? You can only discover that through experimentation. I genuinely don't believe that you can just take what is working for another person, apply it to your life, and expect it to work. Everybody's different, and your constraints are different. Your aspirations are different. So once you're convinced that you don't want to have a toxic relationship to productivity, you want to have a mindful relationship to productivity, how do you do that? Experiment to figure out what works for you.
Thank you so much for sharing this. It makes me think of what you wrote, I think, right at the beginning, which is to try be an anthropologist of your own life and kind of observe yourself and try build a life that works for you and not necessarily one that's built for someone else. For listeners who want to connect with Ness Labs, read more of your work, find you where you're most active, do you mind sharing a little bit about where they should go and what they should do?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to share. So my newsletter is called Ness Labs. It's at nesslabs.com, where you can subscribe, and I send it every Thursday, and I talk about a lot of the topics we discussed today. I'm also on Instagram. You can just look up my name there. And my book, Tiny Experiments, is available anywhere books are sold.
And I highly recommend grabbing a copy, following everywhere, and reading the newsletter, Ness Labs. They're all a big fan. Thank you so much for joining me. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much.
This was My Rejection Story, hosted by me, Alice Draper.